maturity models. And these are examples of primarily navigation and query. There's no way of updating anything. You can see up there it has home, search, contact us, sitemap, what's new. Any of those things are going to be navigation to a web page. And what comes up is typically going to be static data. Now, do you think any of those might possibly change? Do you think any of them are going to display dynamic data?
Search. No, search.
Now search, if I click to search,
It will be a search page.
it's going to be a search page. Now my search page absolutely gets to count query. So I get to count an EQ there because it's going against internal logical files within my system. What about what's new? I hope what's new would change sometimes. But navigating to it is not going to count for anything. When I go into the what's new, I could probably click on what's new in the last month. What's that going to do? There's some logic to go into that, isn't there? I might be able to click on what's new within SEI, what's new within our collaboration. So there might be different queries. Those buttons strictly navigate me to typically static or dynamic web pages. If something comes up, if I do a what's new, and the system says, okay, it's going to query my IP address and figure out the geography, and it's only going to show me what's new in eastern US. Or if you click on what's new, it will only show you what Malaysia is allowed to see. If there's logic behind when I click a menu item and it brings up something select, then you'd have a query there. But all of these buttons along the top only navigate me, so there's 0 function points to those. Now, when you sign on to most systems, that's a query. EQ. There's no calculation, there's no derivation, there's no updating, there's no changing the behavior of the system. Except when I start a clock. So if you've got something that says, here's the amount of time you've been signed on, what happens when I sign on? I'm recording something. I've initiated that my user ID, password, and the time signed on has been updated in an internal logical file. There's a function for that. So how would I count that sign-on? What's the primary intent of a sign-on? To present data to the user, but I'm updating an ILF. So that means that sign-on would be an EO. Absolutely. So you need to take a look at really what are the functions doing. All of these, the capability maturity models that are listed, are strictly a hard-coded list. And each of these here is a hyperlink to another page.
What about capture image? Is it counted or not?
Capturing an image for,
Login.
pardon me?
Login.
For if I'm capturing an image, say for example it takes a picture of me. So, or when I came into the airport and they asked me to put my, my fingerprints down and then took a picture of me, that would be an EO. Because it's, what's my primary, no, actually in that case it would be an EI. Because it's capturing things to go with my passport. So when I had a passport, it took an image of my passport, it took my picture, it took my fingerprints, and what did it do with that? It updated, it created a record of the first time I've been to Malaysia. So it created a passport file for foreign visitors. Now the next time I come in, what do you think it's going to do? It's going to update it. It's going to query first. They'll put my passport in. Hopefully it will check and say, oh, this is your second time to Malaysia. It will ask me for those same things to authenticate, but it won't actually record them. So it'll do an update. Now, do you think there's any way of deleting those? there's probably some batch process that runs in the background that would check and see whether or not people's passports have expired and perhaps delete them so that the system doesn't grow exponentially. Or it might take any of the ones that have expired and put that off to a separate file. So my adds, my changes, my deletes don't necessarily have to all operate in online. There's some situations where there is no deletion at all. That could be an oversight, or it may not be a requirement. So these ones here, a lot of websites are strictly navigation and query. What if I have a downloadable form? What's that? I have something that I can access that says downloadable template. What am I doing there? I'm querying a file, aren't I? I'm querying something that's maintained within the system and taking it out of the system. So the primary intent is to present something to the user. So it's going to be an EQ. Unless there's calculations. Normally there wouldn't be calculations. So websites, normally we've got fill-in forms, which are going to be, if I have a fill-in form that I'm storing, I'm going to have an ILF and an EI. If I have a credit application that's online, and when I click submit, it sends it to another system. It doesn't actually store it in that particular application. What do I have? An output or a query. Even though I'm typing information into the form, it's not being stored in the system that I've got it in. It's actually sending it. So the primary intent would be to collect that information and send it on, not to store it. Photos are typically EOs or EQs, or they are data elements on an EO or an EQ. So I might have downloadable photos, or it may be one det on an output or a query. Clickable images are either going to be navigation. So I might have a clickable image that's the same thing as a hyperlink, or it could be an EQ. Sound are typically going to be dets on an EO or EQ or EI. What if I have a play this video? What do you think? It's typically going to be an EQ. Same thing as a download. Downloadable files are going to be EOs or EQs. Capability is send email to the site administrator. That's going to collect data and send it. Now you also have to consider, is it within the functionality of my system, of my software? Or is it generic browser functionality that sits outside? So you have to consider my application boundary of the software that you're counting. And distributed data processing, when we look at the general system characteristics, the non-functional requirements for a website, generally we're going to take a look at things like general system characteristic number 2, which is distributed data processing. Number 7 is end user friendliness, which is my GUI and navigation aids. Search engines, we need to consider, is it a search engine that is generic, so it will search anywhere, or is it a search engine for my website? If it's a search engine that I built for my website, then we've got EOs or EQs. Now we've got a little bit different terminology called web-based application. This is a little bit more than just a website. This is when we actually have functions cooperatively working together. We've got intranet or internet. It's things like we can purchase merchandise, we can purchase plane tickets. All data might not be stored within my application. The data could be dynamically assembled as in dynamic web pages. So this is a really, really old one, but I liked it because it was really easy to see some of the things that are going on here. So Yahoo, when Yahoo used to be really active. So we've got up here, we've got our browse. Can I count this? Yahoo.com. Can I count that? No. That's not even part of my software. If I'm counting Yahoo, let's just say we're counting this piece right here. What do I have? Auctions. What's that? That's navigation to another website. It's not even part of this. Messenger, what's that going to do?
Open a chat.
That's going to open a chat. Now, if I've deemed that this is all within my boundary, the chat might be a separate piece of software, or it might be within this. And I might say, okay, we're going to count the chat as being within this. Check email, what's that going to do? That's some sort of an email system. And so I can go in and count all the email system functionality and say, okay, this is my email system. What's new? That's going to go to a specific page. It's going to tell me what's new here. Personalize. Okay, what's personalize mean? Think about it. Personalize says record something for me. It essentially does it by storing cookies or files remotely on my server, on my PC. So when I personalize something, it's usually stored on my PC, or it may be stored somewhere in the cloud. It's storing information that I've selected, that I've updated. So what's that tell you? I have an ILF somewhere, don't I? That's storing the information. And when I go into my personalize, if I've never personalized before, it's going to say, here's what you can do. You can choose what you want to see. You can choose the types of ads. You can choose nicknames. You can choose preferred printers. There's a lot of different things I can store in that. When I click on my personalize, if I've already set something up, what's it going to do?
Query.
It's going to query. It's going to show me what I already had in there. I can also probably go in and say delete everything. So there's different functionality, EIs, EQs. Help probably navigates to a queryable help that brings up static web pages. Help is counted within IFPUG as 3 low complexity queries for an entire application. We get 1 low complexity query for having system level help or about this system. We get 1 low complexity query for function or screen specific help. We get 1 low complexity query for field or microline help. Now, if I've got microline help on 15,000 screens, you get 1 low complexity query for that ability. Because it's the same function happening over and over and over, just with different data values that come up.
What about FAQs? Would be
FAQ is typically taking me to a populated web page, and then on the FAQs I can click on a question, it gives me an answer. So it's kind of like an online user manual. And I'd probably get 1 low EQ. I would probably have an ILF for the FAQs and then count an add, change, delete, and query on behalf of the system administrator. And that would be it. So what else do we have here? We've got Yahoo Auctions. Then we've got coins. Now the coins, cards, stamps, and cards, that really just takes me to a particular page. So that's navigation. This here, it used to say Yahoo Messenger now has voice chat. Now say this has a different ad in there that scrolls through. What would that tell you? Say I have, it can come up and it can say weather sometimes, and sometimes it says Sony, and sometimes it says Amazon or something like that.
okay. Click. It's 1 click.
So I click on it and it takes me somewhere and it sends an affiliate link that says, hey, I get money for sending you there. Now, do you think this is infinite? Do you think it just queries every website in the entire world? No, I have an advertiser agreement, don't I? So I have an ILF somewhere that I can add in ads of people that have paid me. So I'm going to have an ILF for advertisers. I'm going to be able to create new advertisers. update existing ones with new ads, delete ones that are no longer paying me, and this thing here is going to be a query. Here's the running list of everybody that paid ad space. So that's going to be an EQ, just for this little thing. Now I've got a search and an advanced search. The advanced search is simply going to contain more data elements typically. It's not going to go against more internal logical files or external interface files. It's just an expanded thing. So do I count one EQ for search and one for advanced search? What do you think? Maybe, maybe not. It's not going to be a lot of function points either way. Then I've got all of these different navigational pages. Those are strictly navigation, 0 function points. Yahoo Shopping. Now what if shopping, when this comes up, goes and checks to see if I'm male or female, goes and checks somewhere to see my age, and then presents me with a list here that are customized based on my preferences. Then that would mean this part here is one low EQ or one average EQ for that presentation. Now when I click on each of these links, that's just navigation again. But the presentation of that dynamic menu, which I would assume what I get would be different than what he gets. So I might get Home Depot based on the fact I'm an engineer. You might not. But the way it looks right here, if it's strictly a hard-coded list like a menu, and it's not dynamic, then there wouldn't be anything to count. So we need to take a look at what is the functionality that's going on. Now, if you're lucky enough to just have the requirements to count from, you don't have to go through this kind of analysis, because then you've got all the requirements, the user requirements. The things that you would create user acceptance test cases for are the same things that would be on here. That's a really good indicator of what is my functionality. This is like having a house in front of you. It's like having the floor plan with all of the plumbing and the electrical and all of the concrete and everything else in a blueprint. And we have to go and step back and say, okay, which ones of these are user functionality? And that's what you need to do. Differences between website and web-based application. As the web-based application, the user input affects the state of the business. So there's usually business logic that's involved. So we can do inputs, we can do outputs, we can do queries. We have ILFs and EIFs. So web-based applications, generally, we have data management functions, where we've got EIs, EOs, EQs, and ILFs. Hyperlinks, again, could be either navigation or EQs or DETs. Login security is typically an EQ, unless we're having to record it. And it may be a low complexity EQ, or if we're gathering data from other places, it could be a higher complexity. Downloadable files, typically EOs or EQs. Airline reservation created online is typically an EI, an ILF, and an EQ. Now what about shopping carts? What do you think? Is a shopping cart countable as an ILF or not? It depends. Am I saving the shopping cart? In some places, the shopping cart's not saved. So I can go in and I can browse all sorts of things. It's saved in my cache, which is outside my system. But if my shopping cart, I go in and I pick and choose things, it's only there for my session. I leave the site, it's gone. That's not an ILF. If I place an order, it moves from the shopping cart, it actually updates and creates an order ILF. Sometimes my shopping carts are saved. Like for example, on Amazon, it saves my shopping cart. And it will sometimes send me an email and say, you know what, you started shopping, don't you want to finish? I've had other places that they've sent me emails that say, you started an order, was there something we did, or can we help you finish it? I'm thinking, wow, I wasn't going to buy it. I'm not, like, it wasn't that I was just slow. I don't want to buy it. But when they send you an email, if I'm counting that other system, what they're doing is they're storing the shopping cart and they're creating outputs that they send an email to me. So they've got an output or a query coming from it. So the airline reservation, I might be doing all sorts of things, what ifs, you name it, and they're all sitting on that screen. I can go in and update things. Unless I create a reservation, the stuff that's on that screen is not an ILF. It's not being stored. It's strictly a scratch pad. So there's no ILF associated with it. And when we take a look at the non-functional requirements, we're taking a look typically at distributed data processing, GUIs, navigation aids, search engines, online data entry, and 24/7 access, typically. And these are the general system characteristics that come into play. Distributed data processing, performance, online update, end user efficiency, online data entry, and flexible query facilities. Then we've got internet, and that's the location for a wide range of applications, including things like e-commerce, email. It's based on the exchange and storage of information using World Wide Web. Usually it's an intranet is usually a self-contained internal internet designed to be used just within the confines of a company. So typically you've got a lot more security that goes on there, a lot more security considerations. Typically restricted by a firewall. So IBM had one, which was kind of interesting, and you've got some things that are publicly available, where it just produces ads or produces news. This list here is kind of a scrolling list of things that are new. If you have a Twitter feed, what is that? Your Twitter stuff may be stored within your blog, or we might be doing a query to populate that Twitter feed. But my Twitter feed is coming from either an ILF or an EIF. So if this here was my ongoing Twitter feed, that's a EQ. Now what we need to do with requirements typically, you have very discrete requirements, and it's pretty easy to see what those are. When you have something like this, we need to take a look and say, this is really a collection of discrete requirements. Some of them are queries, some of them lead to inputs, some of them are outputs. So this is similar to having multiple types of functionality in separate areas. These are menus, but this list here, if that was a Twitter feed or blog posts or anything like that, that would be an EQ right there. If I can click on one of these and it sends me somewhere else, and it might give me a screen full of data, then that would be another EQ, because this would be the input side to a second EQ. Special advertised offers. That probably clicks through and brings up advertisers who have paid me. So it's not going to bring up every advertiser in the world. It's going to bring up a select list. So when I click this, I'm saying, show me special things that you've recorded for me. So that's going to be an EQ. Intranet considerations. Typically, we've got meeting and calendaring functions. So if I've got a meeting system, it's going to query external interface files, which are your individual calendars. It's going to allow me to create meetings that are stored, which is going to be an ILF. So I'll have queries, I'll have add, update, delete, cancel, postpone, a lot of different functions that could happen on meetings. I can query the meeting. And within a meeting query, I might also have a link to maps. So what happens when I have a link to maps? Is that an input-output query or nothing?
You
When I bring up the map, does it just go to the world?
normally you supply some location, so basically you're
Is
supplying
it taking
your
current location and then separating?
I better be sending a location, because if I click on directions, it's sending data out to that other application of my location. Now, when the location comes up in my screen here, is it the functionality of my system? Or is it the functionality of Google Maps that I've happened to place?
External.
Right. So now I'm in another system there. I'm working actually with another system. So when I pull up a map, and this has happened before, it pulls up a generic map of the world. And I'm like, that was stupid. I wanted to know where that location is. So if it brings up that location, then I've done an external query. Does that make sense? So with calendars, typically we've got ILFs, EIs, EQs, controlled employee access to confidential data, access security. Now, oftentimes what we have in intranets is we have functional security. So I've set up that everybody on this side who are supervisors get certain access to be able to update and read. The center group, you can only have read access. And the group on the right, I'm sorry, you have no access at all. What does that tell you? I've got something in my system that is security ILF. I've got users and functional access that I'm creating, updating, probably deleting and querying. And then when I want to go in, I'm doing a query on the access before I let you into the function. So there's functionality in all of that. So I'd have a security ILF or EIF. I might be checking it from somewhere else. I've got an EQ. I might also have that add, change, delete external inputs. Downloadable forms and reports are typically EOs and EQs. Location-specific data, like my phone list and things like that, are EOs or EQs. Online expense report submittal. So I've got a form that comes down, or it brings it up, and it's blank. Now, what if when I go into my expense report, there's two ways it can happen. The first way is it brings me up just a blank form. What do I count there? That's navigation. There's nothing there. When I put all my information in it, and it edits it and submits it, then I have an ILF, right? I have an ILF and I have an EI. And then I can bring it up later. I can look at the status of whether it's been paid. That's an EQ. And then I can delete it. It's an EI. Now, what if when I bring up that expense report form, it goes and it queries my records? So it brings up and it brings forward my employee ID, my name, my address. It pre-fills out a whole bunch of things. Now what do I have? I've got an EQ when that's presented, don't I? So it's actually gone and retrieved data and brought it back. So that's going to be an EQ. So I need to consider whether when I click on a menu item, does it bring back data to my screen, or does it strictly bring back a blank form? If it brings a blank form, there's nothing there. If it brings back a blank form, but it has determined which form I get, depending on whether I'm a resident or I'm an out of country, then I've got logic there, right? So if it's strictly a presentation of a blank form, there's nothing. And you need to know, is there logic behind what is presented and what is presented on the screen? What do we look at in terms of things? Global access, distributed data processing. There's a lot of non-functional things that happen to do with security, to do with access from a non-functional perspective. So there's considerations on certain ones of the general system characteristics. So, was I wrong? No, we just didn't know. Function points allows you to really say, here's the size that we thought our requirements were. That's all it gives us. But to have numbers here instead of napkin approximations is much better. But an estimate is still a prediction. An estimate is never going to be correct until we've actually delivered. So the day before you install a system, you can be the most accurate with your estimates because you know what's going on. Have you ever heard of the cone of uncertainty? Does that sound familiar at all? The cone of uncertainty this is time. Goes like that. The cone of uncertainty says in the very beginning of a project, where you don't know anything at all, you know very little, you've got dotted lines everywhere. It says you could be more than 400% inaccurate because you don't know anything. So that would be if I said to you, I want you to build me a building. And you say, what does the building need to do? I say, well, I don't know. It might be a house, but it might be more like a hospital. I don't know yet. I say, how much will it cost to build it? You say, well, do you want it all on one floor or 2 floors? And I say, I don't know. And you say, do you know where you want to build it? And I say, well, not yet. And I say, well, how about, do you know what rooms you want to have in it? Well, we probably should have some sort of sleeping rooms, and we probably should have some cooking rooms, and that's all we know. Then you've got dotted lines. And then you're way out here. As you get closer and closer and closer to delivery, and this line here, this is your actual. That's how much time. That's your 100% amount of time. But initially, you don't know. And so as we get closer to delivery, here's requirements. So once you have the floor plan, all of your requirements decided, you can get a lot closer to the estimate. So if this is the highest estimate, this is the actual or the most likely, and this is the min. As you get closer and closer and you get the building put up and you get your coding done, and now right here, you're in testing, you still have some variabilities, but you're a lot closer to what the actual is going to be. And at the end, this is when you actually deliver. So you know exactly how much time it took you. You know the exact cost when you deliver. But before that, there's so many variability. So our size, if we have one piece of solid information, and that being our size, that gives you a lot better estimate. But way at the beginning, even if I give you a tool, if I don't know what I'm building, you can't be accurate. Does that make sense?
Question.
Yes.
So when we start a project, so basically that we have, let's say that we have the tender specifications, right? At that stage, there's no detailed specification of the functionality what needs to be done unless you conduct
Right.
the user study with the end
Right.
users, right? So at that stage, when we come up with the estimation, the assessment figures over here for the minimum, is there any like acceptable percentage variations? I mean to say that from the minimum we have this figure, And for the maximum is you have to apply for another like 20%.
Yeah.
Then you have this figure, and you have the middle. So this is the middle or the most likely figures that you put in as to the
Yep.
to the client.
And what's going to happen is if you use something like QSM Slim or SEERSIM, which are or COCOMO 2, you use any of these equations, you're going to be able to have, here's your variation. Do you want to have kind of a 50% probability? Do you want something more accurate? But all of your tools, your software tools will give you, here's kind of the range of what we think it should cost. And your firm fixed price that you put in, if you're doing the bidding or you're doing the evaluation, that's why there's so much variability. You may get one company that says, IBM may say, okay, this cost $1 million, if we estimate it, is going to be probably the least, because we know there's so much stuff that happens on a project. So IBM, we've got, here's my tendering information. And it says we are going to need to have data entry and management. They'll probably say data, or they'll say maintenance of a bunch of things. They say we're going to need to be able to maintain patients. So we might need information on patients. We need to create security information so that their data doesn't get out to other people. We need to have encryption. So you've got your tendering documents, but they're not very specific. They're closer over here. But what do you get in a tender? You get one number, right? You get one firm fixed price. So the department will give you, here's your amount to build this thing. But it might be this, it might be that, it might be all of this, right? So you get $1 million to manage. Or if you ask for $2 million, and you can say why, we'll give you $2 million. But if you're really good, and you're going to include some other things, then maybe we give you $3 million. What number should we give you? What number should you ask for? There's a range, right? So this is what, now just taking a look at this whole page, this is our cost estimating industry. This is our software development industry. There's a lot of question marks, right? It's a lot.
Yeah, but if we're using from the feedback, and also from your experience in doing this assessment, at bidding stage, you say that when the bidders submitting
Right.
the proposal, so what is the allowable percentage that you think that, with this price, this could be up to 30%, as a bid markup? Or is there any rules for that from the IFPUG that we can understand that, okay, the bidding price is actually, how much is it the variation?
IFPUG will give you rules on how to size what we know. Okay, that's all IFPUG will give you. What the estimating tools will give you is, we've done project number 1, and project number 1 was this exact size, these exact non-functionals, these exact technical requirements. So with those, if you're early in the project, it could range 30%, plus or minus 30%, because they've got history in all these different projects. When you use an estimating tool, and the estimating tool has 8,000 or 10,000 projects in it, then you know that your project, when you do an estimate, is probably going to be pretty good. It's better than being way over here. But you're still going to have variability. So what you can do, though, is say, and this is what governments are doing, we think it's about 800 function points. At a cost of average for this type of a system, we're going to charge you $1,000 per function point. So an 800 function point project, $1,000 a function point, we're going to give you 800,000, no, we will give you $1 million as the top price. But as you deliver, we'll pay you. So you deliver the reporting piece, and we've agreed that is 200. Now you get $200,000. Okay, and then we deliver the next piece, and that's also 200. So now you get another $200,000. We've agreed in advance. Oh, now there's some changes. Yikes. Okay, we don't want those reports. We actually want some different reports. What are we going to do now? Well, you want to trade out 100 function points. Well, if you do that way at the very beginning, when we haven't started them, yeah, we can trade 100 function points for 100 function points. That's like crossing something out on a floor plan. What does that cost to change requirements way at the very beginning when it's only on paper? Does it cost you anything? Not very much, right? Cost you minimum. But what if I'm 3/4 finished coding that report? Now we've got costs. So I might say in here, so we've delivered 200 function points. Here we've delivered 200. Now we've got some changes in here, but it's at the very beginning. So we're going to take this part off, and we're going to add another part here. Okay, we've agreed there's no cost to remove this. We're just going to do another 100 over here. That's okay. We're still sitting at 800. But now we've got some reports that we delivered, and we say we don't want them. So now we're saying, okay, that 200 that you already paid for, we want more. Well, you've already paid for it. I'm sorry. You've already got a cottage out the back. If you don't use it, that's your choice, but we've already delivered that. So now we can go through our project, and we may say at the end of the project, in agreement with the supplier and the customer, we tendered for 1 million. We tendered for this size. Now we're going through and we've already delivered 800. And we've still got this extra piece down here. What are we going to do? Do you need it? I don't know. Well, maybe we had no idea. Everybody guessed that the whole thing was 800 function points. It's actually going to be 1,000. Now what do we do? Now that becomes a customer negotiation. Because we delivered and we agreed this was our guess. Does that make sense? Now it's in practice. This would be so nice if everything could just be as it goes here. And it doesn't happen exactly like that. But with scope management, with using function point based pricing, you have a possibility of doing this. Because you can sit down and say, yes, this was a 200 function point area. We've delivered this type of thing. But you still will have variability, absolutely. What happens in the United States more often than anything is we do a firm fixed price at the beginning. And that firm fixed price of 1 million or 1.2 million or 5 million is based on a lot of unknowns. And based on saying, well, if it's really this size, and in terms of size, a lot of times they'll say, okay, how big is it? 6 months, 30 people. Is that a size? It's a size of how big we think the effort's going to be, but it has nothing to do with the product. So function points is going to give us something to do product size of what we're delivering. But we'll never be accurate. The estimating tools will tell you, here's the kind of range that you're doing. And it makes a difference who you are. If you are the supplier and you need to do pricing is different than costing. Costing says, what will it take me to build this? Pricing says, what should I charge you so I have a good assurance of profit? So if all of my materials add up to $100, and I add in my labor, and I think it's going to take, so let's give an example. I'm going to build you a fence. You come to me and you say, how much will it cost you to build a fence? And I say, okay, am I buying the materials or are you buying the materials? And you say, you buy the materials. So I buy the materials. You want a fence that is 3 meters long. You've told me what you want it to look like. Now it is up to me to go and buy the materials and do the work. What are my choices? I can do it myself. I could hire my son. My son's never built a fence before. So that might take him 3 weeks. It might take me 1 week. Those are choices, right? I might hire somebody from across the street. I might hire a home building company to come in and build it. And they might bring in supervisors because somebody has to watch somebody building a fence. And then I've got 3 people who have to take things out of the package. So I might hire a whole team. What about the cost of materials? Well, I can go on the internet and look at fencing materials. So I can go to Amazon and have them deliver me the cheapest possible fence from China. It might not be good, but I'm going to get the cheapest possible because he didn't tell me what quality he wants. So if I look at what it will cost him, I need to make sure that I'm not losing money. I need to make sure that I've got my cost plus a profit. And that's the price I will give you. And the same thing goes with software. We give a good approximation of what we think it's going to do. So my effort equation is not going to be simple. It's not going to be simply taking function points times a magic number. I can do a very, very high-level approximation, the same way we did when we said, okay, approximately $1,000 a function point, and we can use that. So, whoops. So productivity, if you take a look at productivity, now productivity is a number that we assess after a project is finished. So once I know my actual hours on my actual function points, I can figure out what was my average function points per hour, or how many hours did it take me to deliver a function point. And we can use that in different equations as well. So, the International Function Point Users Group, which is www.infpub, this is really important. It's .org. There's another group out that is a commercial venture, a vendor, that has ifpub.com. That is not the Function Point Users Group. ifpub.org is the official Function Point Users Group. It is a not-for-profit group of users who define the method. So make sure if you want information on what we're doing, go to ifpub.org. The original method in 1979, which was before many of you were born, was when Alan Albrecht presented his first ideas at a guide share conference at IBM. 30 years later, here we are. And we've created this International Year of Software Measurement. And you're invited. If you have bosses or somebody who say, we'd like to send you to Cleveland to get training. Cleveland, Ohio. September 13th to 15th, which is coming up next month. So IFPUB 4.3.1, which came out in January of 2010, is the method that we use to count function points. It's also the formation of ISO IC 20926. is the same thing. So we can use function points to support quality and productivity, to estimate cost and resources, provide a normalization factor. Those are things that we can do with this. In ISO standards, this is the world of ISO standards. This is only a small piece. But we've got 15939, which is right over here. That is a measurement standard. There's 29155, which is a benchmarking standard. The function point standards are right here. So when we take a look at function points, we're asking the question, how big is the software? We can use it when we're figuring out what we're going to re-engineer. We can use it when we're estimating test cases, because test cases should test every piece of functionality. So if we've got all of the functional requirements that we've pulled out of the requirements, we've said, okay, this set are all the functions that we're going to deliver. That's a really good basis for creating test cases. Understanding our productivity ranges, understanding scope creep. Capers-Jones says that for every month of a project, you will have 1.5% scope creep. That's an important number. Think about that. So that means if I've estimated a project as being 200 function points, and I've said it's going to be 18 months long, what does that tell you? If it's 1.5% per month, that gives me 27% scope creep from the start to the finish. So my 200 function points is actually going to be 200 times 1.27. So it's going to grow by 27%. So it's going to be closer to 250 function points by the time that project's finished. That's an important number to notice. Calculating the true cost of software. So if I've estimated 1 million, but it actually took $2 million to build it, what is the true cost? 2 million, not my estimate. Estimating project cost schedule, helping with contract negotiation, and scope management. Yeah.
Question is that for the 1.5% variation is minus the stores. That is until what stage? Is it?
That's until the end, till delivery. Now that's just an approximation. Most people would not even consider that. They would say 200 function points, that's it. But in history, knowing that by the time you get to the end of a project, knowing that that 1.5 is kind of what happens on projects, maybe what I should do at the beginning of a project is put in 250 as the approximate size to account for historically what I know the project will do. I can still use 200 function points because if management says, show me where you got the 200 function points, I can show them. But to be realistic, I probably want to say, if it's a 6-month project, then it's really only growing by maybe 10%. But that's and you wouldn't necessarily want to even add in the scope creep. But if you want to get a better estimate at the end, you may say, yeah, I'm going to account for this reality. Source lines of code. Why would we use source lines of code? Because they vary with the programmers. Sometimes you can have cookie cutter, where I build the same thing over and over and over and over. And my history is really, really good. I've got 500 projects where I know exactly how many source lines of code they're going to be. Can I use it then? Sure. But if I've got no idea, then source lines of code I can only get at the end of a project. I don't know how big it'll be. High-level languages end up with fewer lines of code per function. My actual source lines of code I don't know until the end, and there's no standard method. So why not use source lines of code? It's very variable. Function points are not for fixing problems. The effort I spend to understand the problem and the maintenance programmer's productivity can vary by as much as 1,000%. Maintenance simply keeps the system up and running. So if I have 1,000 function point system in place today, maintenance just keeps that up and running. It keeps it operational. So there's 0 function points typically with maintenance. There's nothing that's changing. Performance tuning and configuration. If I'm not changing functionality, if I'm not doing a renovation project, if I'm not changing the function points, is 0 function points. Does that mean it's 0 effort? No. It just means that I'm not doing construction. So it's the same thing if I've got a construction equation, and my construction equation is good for using brand new buildings. It's good for going in and renovating my kitchen or my bathroom. But what about when I go and I do gardening? Can I use square feet for my yard? No, it doesn't make any sense at all. If I tell you I want to have a very nice yard in front of my house, how much will it cost you to bring in 50 trees? I'll give you square feet. Will that help you? Square feet has nothing to do with trees. Function points has nothing to do with maintenance. That's effort, but it's not based on function points. Performance tuning, configuring tables, doing data population. Those are not building. Function points are only for construction and renovation of software. That's it. When you're doing an estimate though, what if I have a piece that is construction and a piece that is maintenance? I have to do 2 estimates and using 2 different equations. So my first estimate is I've got this many function points, run it through the equation. The second one, which says I also want to do maintenance, I might have to do in terms of hours or some other cost. You have a question?
I have a question that from the function point council that we have during the project. So you mentioned that when function point council give some indicator for maintenance, but what about the resources required to maintain the system? Is there any indicator or formula that we can apply from the HP or something of that?
There are maintenance. If I have a system that's sitting in place today and it's 1,000 square feet, or I mean 1,000 function points. So I have 1,000 function point system, and I know that to keep that up and running has taken me 3 people full time. So this year it's going to take me 3 people full time. How many people do you think it will take next year if nothing changes? The same 3 people. Now the next year, if I grow that system by 500 function points, so now it's a 1,500 function point system, can I still use those 3 people? I probably need 4.5 people. So it's going to grow, and we can use those types of numbers for maintenance. Now what I can't do is say I have a maintenance request, and the maintenance request will go in and update one of my functions to make it run faster. I'm not changing anything about the functionality, I'm changing the performance. How much time will that take me to do? Function points can't help you there. Because that's like saying, I have a house, I want you to come in and fix my pipes in my wall. I have a leaking pipe. Can you come in and fix that pipe? And can you charge me by the square foot? No, I'm going to charge you to come in by the hour because it's going to take me 6 hours to fix that. I'm not going to say I'm going to charge you $30 a square foot. It's going to be based on hours. The same thing for maintenance.